Welcome, everybody. We're very excited to have you online. As I stated, there's, within the next 5 minutes, people will probably be logging on. We're just going to go through some introductions and some house cleaning items. We're so excited to have you here in cold Minnesota. This is kind of a fun thing to do. I'm looking outside and we've got a few snowflakes falling and bare trees, so it's nice and cold, and I can see that people are coming from all over the world, which is really cool and exciting, the beauty of our industry. So today we're going to be talking about UDI and the EU MDR in webinar format, and we're going to be specifically addressing the key differences from the US FDA regulations. Argos Multilingual, which is who I work for, and Qualitas Professional Services, which is where Lena is. We're putting this on together because we feel it's a timely topic that we've all been receiving a lot of questions about. So this is going to be really great. I know Lena is a wealth of knowledge. But before I introduce Lena, my name is Shannon Rose. I'm the Senior Vice President of Life Science Strategy for Argos Multilingual, and I'm going to be the moderator today. So you'll hear me talk a little bit here in the beginning, and then I'll help to moderate and handle some of the questions at the end. I've known Lena for quite some time. She's such a positive force, always a smile on her face. I just love talking with her, but she's very well known in the quality and regulatory space. She's the president and a consultant at Qualitas Professional Services. Prior to this, she has had over 20 years of quality and project management services experience with Target Financial Services and Key Surgical. She now focuses on the implementation of sustainable quality management systems and globally compliant UDI programs. She does this through validation, documentation, and project management resourcing for the medical device industry. She also is a member of a laundry list of, of groups, but I'm going to name 4 key ones that have to do with this webinar. The Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, the Association for Healthcare Resources and Materials Management Learning UDI community, ISO, and of course RAPS. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lena Cordie.
All right, thank you, Shannon. Always a pleasure to hear you try to introduce me in a new way every time. I love it. All right, so the topic of today is UDI in the, in how it's addressed in the EU MDR, and really how different is it from the US FDA UDI requirements. For those of you, and I recognize some of the names on the attendees, you know that I can talk probably ad nauseum on 2 subjects, quality management systems and UDI. So I will try to contain this information to the span of 45, 50 minutes to allow questions. It's a really fun topic for me because it's just very logical and process driven, and for my type of the way I think and the way I work, it's a perfect fit. So what I want to do though is hopefully give you enough information to start, to calm the fears of what's UDI going to be like in the EU, and give you a little bit more information to get started. Our learning objectives for today, first will be an overview of fundamental UDI concepts. Now, I don't know how many of you have already had experience with UDI. Well, it's been around here in the US now for about 2 or 3 years, 4 years. So you're probably aware of it, but I don't know to what extent. So I just want to, level out that playing field, make sure everybody understands the basic concepts we're talking about. Then we'll review the high-level requirements of UDI as they're written into the EU MDR. This is really focused on the MDR, not the IVDR, although if you have specific questions about the IVDR requirements, I can address those offline. This is really written focusing on medical devices. We'll highlight the key differences between the EU and the US system. Not in 45 minutes, an hour, I'm not going to be able to get into other global UDI systems such as China, the Saudi Arabia one, Turkey, and so on. So it's really going to be focused on EU and US, but if you want additional information on those, obviously, definitely please contact me after this webinar as well. And then we'll review the timelines for implementation. So let's get down to the basics. Unique device identification, everybody says UDI, but I like to look at UDI as really having two different meanings. The first is this unique device identification as being the process. This is really the method of clearly, distinctly, and unambiguously identifying medical devices, components, sets, kits, systems, anything within that healthcare supply and use chain. So it's the process is that what is the system, what is the methodology, what is the concept of UDI? And it's important to understand that unique does not imply serialization. It doesn't have any serials will come into play as a part of UDI, but unique does not mean that every device out there has to have a serial number. So we're going to talk about UDI as the unique device identification process. We are also going to talk about UDI as unique device identifier, or the actual tool that is used for this identification. The UDI as the tool is a unique numeric or alphanumeric code, and it's made up of two different parts. The first part is your device identifier. This is static information, and it identifies the company and the product. And then attached to that is your production identifier. And this is going to contain your variable information, such as production and control information to show when a device was manufactured. Those two parts together create your UDI, the unique device identifier, the tool. It's important to know that this UDI, it can be in various forms. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But typically it's presented in two formats: a barcode along with a human readable information. So that together is your UDI. So why do we need UDI? When this first came out, first started hearing about it, geez, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, everybody, the FDA was saying, all the big talk was, oh, this is about patient safety. This is going to improve patient safety. And we're going to be able to keep track of devices and where they're at. And when I was in the medical device manufacturer at the time, and manufacturers were like, no, this is all about supply chain. This isn't going to help with patient safety. This is all about making sure that people can order the right product, that we can get it from through the logistics systems and so on. But what we've seen is that it's really taking all of that, and it's really it's a combination of both. It's going to benefit both the supply chain as well as patient safety. It provides more efficient, accurate, and an automated method of capturing your device information, and that information then is used in supply chain. It's used in your patient electronic health records, as well as we're going to see this starting to appear in global device registries. The use of unique device identification allows better visibility of your device supply and movement. So you know where it is, and that's going to obviously help with your recalls by providing improved visibility. It also will allow the FDA to monitor and manage adverse events. It'll help manufacturers as well as healthcare facilities, with the post-market surveillance and so on. So it's a multi-purpose tool. And also, what a lot of people tend to forget is that you can use UDI internally in your own, as a medical device manufacturer, you can use UDI for your own purposes as well, to help you track, to help you connect, for example, documentation to a device and so on. So it's a powerful tool, a very, it's something that has more power to it than what's actually included in the barcode itself. So it's all in the application. So let's talk about some definitions. Now remember, these definitions are going to be primarily based off of Annex 6, Part C of the MDR. And I'm going to start with the basic UDI because this one tends to cause a lot of confusion for people. This is a new concept in the MDR that the FDA does not have. And the way that it's written in the MDR, because this wasn't written by, it was written by government, by legislative people, regulatory people. It wasn't written by people that really have to apply UDI, so it's a bit confusing. But it's really the main key for records in the UDI database and for relevant documents. So the basic UDI-DI is going to be used, you're going to use this number on your certificates, your declarations of conformity. You'll use it, you'll refer to it in your technical documentation. What it does is associate your device, all the devices that have the same intended purpose, risk class, and so on, together. And this basic UDI is going to be unique to each organization. It is not going to appear on any packaging and labeling or on the trade item itself. So it's really, it's to identify these related products. The analogy that I like to use, because I'm a visual person, so I need to, okay, let me explain how this works, right? So if any of you are familiar with the SRN, the single registration number, this is a requirement now of the MDR that every organization has this single registration number. Think of that as an author, okay? That's medical device manufacturer, it's the author of a book. Now that book is going to be your basic UDI, okay? The book is going to contain all this information related to a particular subject. Within that book, we're going to get into the chapters, and the chapters are going to be your device identifier. The device identifier is that static portion of the UDI, and it identifies, it's kind of that access key, so you know kind of where to go in the database, UDI database, to gather the information. That DI contains the company name and address, the product name, and reference number. And the DI is critical for identification of device and the device manufacturer. So similar to a chapter, you've got the chapter number and the title so that you can identify where in that book you are. Next, in that book, we have pages. And the pages are really, think about them as being your production identifier. The production identifier is dynamic or variable portion of the UDI. It's going to change based on each lot number, or serial number of a device. This information, it's important to understand, is not included in any of the UDI databases. This is a change from the original FDA UDI draft document that was sent out for comment. All that's needed is in the FDA GUDID, you need to identify how or what is used in your production identifier for a device, and that's going to be similar in the MDR as well. So the pages then contain your dynamic information specific to the production controls, and it's critical for traceability of the device and at the patient level. All right. And then, people have asked me, so you've got the pages, Lena, so what about the paragraphs? Well, the paragraphs in each one of those pages, think about them as being your data elements. And those data elements are going to go into your UDI database. In the FDA, in the US, we have the GUDID, the Global Unique Device Identification Database. In Europe, we'll have the Eudamed. It's the European database for these medical devices. And it's really more than just for UDI purposes. It actually integrates electronic systems, multiple electronic systems, to collate and process information regarding medical devices. And the objectives of the database, enhance transparency. So member states, the various countries and the EU can have access to the same information from the same location. So it's the central repository of all this information. And it'll avoid multiple reporting requirements. So we'll make the reporting process much easier for medical device manufacturers going forward. And then also to streamline that flow of information between your economic operators, the notified bodies, sponsors, member states, even the healthcare facilities, the users of the devices. So that's that's kind of the structure of UDI, the various levels of it, as well as the database. So your UDI is going to be available in two formats. The first is automatic identification and data capture, or AIDC as the acronym for that. It's the technology used to automatically capture your data. This is going to be your barcodes, it could be a smart card, biometrics, RFID. Neither the MDR nor the FDA regulation specify what kind of technology you need to use. And that's very smart, because technology is always changing. So it allows an organization to be very flexible and try new things. But AIDC, just in general, is a broad category of those technologies used to collect that information and used to manage inventory, delivery, assets, security, and documents. So just in general, a general technology. The Human Readable Interpretation, HRI. This is your your legible interpretation of the data characters encoded in the UDI carrier. And that's going to appear when you're talking UDI. The UDI is going to be the barcode, the AIDC barcode, along with the HRI information together. So that's going to create your UDI. And that's for purposes of, so that as a consumer, we're not always going to have a really cool barcode UDI reading app on your phone, so you won't be able to read. You still need the UDI information, but you're not able to read it. So that's where the human readable information comes into play, to allow non-technical users to access information. Again, the UDI carrier, just some terminology that you're going to see when you read the EU MDR. It's the method used to present the AIDC and HRI information. Let's talk a little bit about, there's the UDI carrier is your barcode format, and that's developed by the issuing agency for that you choose to use for your UDI. Most popular one throughout the world is GS1, using their barcode formats. The other one is HIBIC, and I'll just go into that briefly. And then there's ICBA, ICCBBA for your blood and tissue donor. Not very much used because it's very specific to that industry. But it's very easy to tell the difference between a GS1 and a HIBIC. Your GS1 is going to have an AI code. These AI codes are application identifiers, and they really provide, it's a message to the AIDC, to the technology, saying, hey, here's a new set of data that's coming up. So it's used, the AI codes identify those pieces of data. For example, in parentheses, you'll have a 0, 1, and by seeing that, you understand that the next set of digits is going to be your G10, or your global trade identification number. 10 represents a lot number, and then 17 the expiration date. This varies from HIBIC, which is also easy to identify because it starts with a plus sign. Rather than with the AI, with GS1, you have parentheses and a number. With HIBIC, you have the plus sign, and they've got, it's set up similarly, but they use different terminologies for how to get the GTIN versus your primary data structure has your labeler identification code and catalog number and so on. So let's get into the meat of what the EU MDR requirements for UDI are. These can be found in Annex 6, Parts A, B, and C. The articles that are related to UDI, there's a number of them. You'll see that UDI is really embedded, integrated throughout the MDR, and but primarily the one that we're going to focus on for the requirements is Article 27. The title of that is UDI system, followed by 28, which is UDI database. But you'll find references in the other articles, as well as in these annexes that are related to UDI as well. Particularly keep in mind Annex 6 Part B, which talks about the core data elements that will be provided to the UDI database. So let's look at Article 27. This states the requirement. It says basically that, okay, you have to implement a UDI system. This sets out the legal requirements, the regulation saying that this is required. It specifies the need to designate one or multiple issuing entities. So very similar to the FDA, where our issuing agencies. and the MDR does, they are using GS1, HIBIC, and ICPA as well, so parallel with the US. It states very clearly that a manufacturer must assign the UDI to the device in all higher levels of packaging, but this is critical because before placing that device on the market. So we'll have to talk a little bit about logistics and timing, because what about products that are already on the market and so on. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. UDI carriers should also be placed on the label of the device and all higher levels of packaging. But just like with the US, this excludes shipping containers. It does not, you do not have to have UDI on a shipping container. A little bit of confusion with that. If you have a product that's in a box on your shelf and you're just picking that shelf box and putting a shipping label on it and sending it out, that isn't considered a shipping container. That's really a shelf box, right, that you are then repurposing as your shipping container. So then that would have the UDI on it. But shipping containers are those external plain, maybe your company branded boxes. Think of an Amazon box that you put your products in to send. And those do not require UDI on them. UDI must be used for reporting serious incidents and field safety corrective actions. Basic UDI, this is the first, this is where we see reference to that basic UDI, and that it's going to appear on your declaration of conformities. And this is critical as well. And this is similar to the US requirement. Manufacturer must keep a current list of all assigned UDIs. It goes on to say in the technical documentation. And so you have to think, what is technical documentation in terms of the MDR? But this is, you have to know where are your UDIs. Now, does this mean UDI-DI or the full UDI with the DI and the PI? Now, people think, if you were to keep a list of every single one of your UDIs, plus, the DI plus the PI that you produce every day, you're going to have an astronomical amount of data. So really what they're saying is keep a list of all your assigned UDIs, the DI portion, and have access to or understand how you are assigning those PIs. A lot of times you will find this information in your device history file, your technical documents, your labeling systems, where you're keeping your audit trails, and you're able to pull up your print history for your labels. So don't think of this in black and white. Oh, you need to keep a list of every single UDI, DI plus PI that's printed. And that would be a little bit unimaginable. So separate UDIs per the MDR are required for certain systems. So you have a system which is a product that's combined to achieve a medical purpose. You put things together. A separate UDI is required for those products within that system. Configurable device is a device consisting of several components. You need separate UDIs for each one of those. And then your procedural packs, products that are packaged for a medical purpose. You need UDIs for those as well. So you'll have it at the system level, and then all the individual items that are within the system, the configurable device, or the procedure pack. It's important to understand UDI must be on the individual device packages, as well as on the group packaging for the product. UDIs are, again, MDR. UDIs are not required for single-use devices that are not intended for use outside of the system or pack, and devices that are already exempt from UDI. So there are some exemption opportunities allowed in the MDR. This is similar to the US FDA as well. Single-use devices don't need, there's exceptions for single-use devices as well as bulk packaging and so on the FDA side as well. So let's talk a little bit about configurable device versus system, because there is some confusion about that. A configurable device consists of several components that can be assembled by the manufacturer in multiple configurations. So you have a device, and it's going to be size specific because you have different components based on whether it's for an adult, whether it's a child, whether it's an infant, and so on. So you have a UDI, but you have individual pieces that you swap out as needed for specific, almost I hate to say this word, but similar to like a custom product. You're pulling in these products for a specific customer or user. And then you have a system which is a combination of products that packaged together or separately, that they're all intended to be interconnected. So they may be in 4 different boxes. Maybe it's a computer monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and then a transducer or something that's connected to it that provides the data. So that's the system where things that are interconnected and combined to achieve that specific medical purpose. Let's talk a little bit about UDI for implantable devices. It's important to understand. First, I'm going to say in the US, implantable devices need a UDI. Do not get this confused with requirements for direct marking. That's a whole nother subject, and we'll talk about direct marking a little bit later. But UDI, so a unique device identifier, is required for implantable devices. Per the MDR, that UDI is placed on the lowest level of packaging. So we immediately open it and your implant is there. Active implantable devices must have a serial number as part of your UDI-PI. So that production identifier needs to have that serial number. The unique device identifier, UDI, must be identifiable prior to implantation. So how are you going to do that? If it's on that lowest level of packaging, is that user able to, is the healthcare practitioner, are they able to, how are they able to find that UDI for the implant? A lot of the times this is being used with an implant card that is provided with the UDI on it along with the device, because then that implant card can be scanned and go into your electronic health record, as well as given to the patient so that they have the UDI information with them. But remember, UDI for purpose, is different from direct marking. Direct marking is a subset of UDI. I'm going to go over UDI for software as a medical device very briefly, because there's a lot of, this is a very confusing topic, or it can be very confusing, especially for people that don't work with software as a medical device. So if this is your world and you want more information, please contact me. But just to make everybody aware at a high level, software that is a device and separately distributed must have its own UDI. So if it's incorporated into a device, if it's integrated in that, it doesn't necessarily need to have a UDI. This is if it's separately distributed. It's also assigned at the system level for the software, and this is a little bit different. This is where it differs from the MDR differs from the FDA. For the MDR, the UDI on the label of that on the label of the software packaging and the software itself must be identical. The FDA does allow for some variances there. And the HRI, that human readable interpretation, must be on a readily accessible screen. So a lot of people will put it in the About section of the software. So here we get into direct marking a little bit. Per the MDR, reusable devices must have that UDI carrier on the device itself. The MDR says it has to have the AIDC and that human readable, so the barcode and the human readable. I got some screens later on that show distinct differences between the two, and this is one between the US and the EU, and this is one of them. UDI on reusable devices devices that require processing between uses must have a permanent and readable mark on them throughout the intended lifetime of the device. So again, if your device is intended to be processed between uses, you need to have a direct mark on that, and that's going to assist your cell processing departments, your SPDs, in helping them with their traceability of the sets and stuff as they're processing them for between cases. The UDI, again, I mentioned this on the previous slide, a UDI on the label of software packaging as well as the software must be identical. And then the direct marking is not required. This is if it interferes with safety and performance or is not technologically feasible. This is the same with the FDA as well. So a device that, for example, a K-wire, while it's it's single use, but it could be, you may have to, it may not be used in a case, so you're going to process it again for the next case. You're not going to put a UDI on that because that's going to interfere with the safety and performance of the KY or the PIN. There's many devices out there that this applies to. And it's just important that you document that. Don't just say that, oh, this is going to interfere with the safety and performance. You have to have testing, and you have to have evidence to show that it's not safe or that it affects the performance of the device. So again, everything in regulatory and in medical devices and in life in general, we know that there are exceptions. And some of these exceptions that are called out in the MDR are related to custom and investigational devices. They do not need to have UDI or direct marking. Devices for retail or point of sale do not need to have the UDI production identifier in the AIDC on that label. That's similar to the US as well, though slightly different because this only applies for the UPC code in the US is used as UDI for class 1 devices. But in the EU, you can just use the DI, and that's great because it allows a manufacturer to print a ton of product packages, right? Without having to worry about changing it or updating it for each unit or batch of product that's coming through. Individually packaged and sold class 1 and class 2A single-use devices. So if you have a product that is bulk packaged, maybe you have some single-use towel clamps or forceps. You don't need to have a UDI direct mark on each one of those devices. You can have it on that higher level of packaging. So you have 100 one of these plastic towel clamps in a plastic bag or a box. You just need to have the UDI on the box. It doesn't have to be on each individual unit inside. If there are significant space constraints on the unit of use packaging, then you would place that UDI on the next higher level of packaging. So if you have, maybe you've got some screws that are in a very, very small package, but they're then put in a larger package, maybe for sterilization purposes or to ensure that they're not lost. It just needs to go in that larger container. One thing to know though, do not try to use this next. I'll go to this next exception first. If limited space for both the AIDC and the human readable, if there's limited space on the label, then only the AIDC is required. Unless that product is intended for home care, then you have to have the human readable. So think about that end user, right? Is the end user going to be able to read a barcode? Will your grandma be able to read a barcode on a device that they have at home? No, so then that's where you have the human readable. So back to the space bit of it, because these two the last 2 points are connected. It's going to be very difficult to say that you don't have enough space on your label if you have a large package and there's plenty of room for a larger label, but you just don't want to change your labeling. Or if you have a lot of marketing information, maybe your logo is really, really large on your label and you have a bunch of other information, when maybe it's a picture of or a drawing of the device itself on that label, you'll have a difficult time trying to get an exception for that, because they could say, well, you've got more information here for marketing than you do for patient safety. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at using space constraints and limited space as an exception reason. All right, so key differences. Like I said, I can talk forever on UDI, so hopefully I'll move through these next slides pretty quickly. Differences in requirements. This one slide, if you take anything from the presentation, take this and use it as kind of a guidepost to help you, with your UDI project. In the EU MDR, UDI is required for class 1 devices. You have to have both the DI and the PI. That's a significant change from the US, where class 1 devices are only required to have that device identifier. Now, a lot of companies will elect to voluntarily put a PI on those class 1 devices. Nothing wrong with that. If you do that in the US, You just have to make sure that you're complying with all the PI requirements. You can't just decide you want to use portions of it, right? So you have to be fully compliant if you choose to do that. But in the EU, you have to have both the DI and the PI. So if you are trying to build a sustainable UDI system, you may want to consider, if you don't have the PIs assigned to your Class 1 devices in the US, you may want to consider adding that as a part of your EU UDI initiative to help streamline your labeling processes. Per the MDR, single-use device packaging exception is limited to Class 1 and 2A devices. However, in the US, single-use devices of all classes, with the exception of implants, that are sold individually do not need a UDI. That can be on that bulk packaging. So the limitation in the EU, again, is for that single-use device packaging is for Class 1 and 2A devices only. In the EU, again, UDI on the label and the software itself must be identical, but it may be identified with the same device identifier or a different one in the US. In the EU MDR, cleaning is considered processing for reusable devices. Okay, so that's important to know because the FDA mentions sterilization and disinfection, but not cleaning. And for those of you who look at ISO 17664 for the information to be supplied by a manufacturer for the devices, talk about IFUs. There's a lot of talk about cleaning, sterilization, and disinfection. Or if you're involved in any of the AMI and ISO working groups, there's a lot of discussion about this because cleaning is fundamentally it's a critical process for sterilization and disinfection. So it's strange that the FDA did not consider cleaning as one of those processing elements for reusable devices. It's also, you must understand that there's no direct mark exception allowed for those reusable devices. And then this is kind of semantics, but it does lead to some confusion. In the MDR, manufacturers are the ones that are responsible for the UDI, whether it's assigning the UDI, applying it, they're responsible for that information and for the UDI being compliant. Whereas in the US, labelers are responsible for the UDI. So you may be the legal manufacturer and you're responsible for the content on the label, then you're going to be responsible for the UDI. But remember that the labeler for the US does not necessarily mean that entity that is physically applying the label to the product. Okay, it's still going to be the person who's legally responsible for the labeling information. So slightly different, and you have to look at terms and definitions and how they differ between the quality system regulation for the FDA and the EU MDR, but just keep that in mind, especially as you're writing your procedures, your SOPs for UDI at your organization. Well, I want to talk a little bit about the database elements for UDI. The Eudamed is not ready yet, although it is being worked on, and we have been told as of May 26, 2018, so just this year, the Eudamed IT team has compiled the Eudamed implementation plan, as well as the draft functional specifications for all of the electronic systems or modules related to Eudamed. In October 2018, the IT engineering details such as process overviews, data models, and business rules were expected to be ready. And I apologize, I've been crazy busy for the last month or so traveling, so I have not updated, looked into that to see if they hit that target date. The expected finalization for all modules of Eudamed, they need to be ready for an external audit by September of 2019. And that's necessary for meeting the target date of March 25th, 2024, that first release of Eudamed. So while we can't really do much right now as far as data and putting data into Eudamed, we know that it's out there and we need to be aware of this. So the database elements in Eudamed, the items that are in purple are those items that are specific to the Eudamed, that they differ from the US GUDID requirements. Basic UDI, DI, that single registration number, authorized representative name and address. Those are all very specific to the EU. I think this number 9 is interesting, the risk class of that device. The US does not require that in the database. However, it's kind of compensated for that because they have you know, the product code and other very 510K numbers and stuff. So you're able to kind of get to what you're able to find out what the risk class of that device is. Number 11, device model, reference, or catalog number. This is a little bit different from the FDA because the FDA requires both the device model is the required element. The catalog number is optional. There have been some changes with that recently, though, with because it caused confusion, and the FDA is acknowledging that the catalog number is more oftenly used. So slight difference there between US and FDA. I'm sorry, US and the EU. In the Eudamed, again, maximum number of reuses. This is really interesting because how does a manufacturer has to do that testing and determine what are those maximum number of reuses for a device. And then the Eudamed is also requiring the URL for where to find additional information on a product. A lot of these other the other data elements are very similar, if not identical, to what's in the GUDID. But just to give you an idea of volume, the US has 62 data elements that are required, whereas the EU has 25. So there are 25 different elements that you'll be putting into Eudamed. Now, the big change though is it's very likely that, and I haven't heard the definitive, but I hear this more and more, that that it's going to be required that all this information be put into Eudamed in all of the required languages. So keep an eye out for information on that, because if you're not translating into the 27 or 30 languages, you'll have to do that. So Argos Multilingual will be a great resource for help with that kind of information for the Eudamed. The database elements, so the difference between the 25 and the 62, these are the additional fields in the GUDID database. You actually have to specify in the database your issuing agency, although it's pretty easy to deduce that based on the GTIN and how it's formatted. Label or DUNS number, that's going to be very similar to the single registration number, but it's acquired in very different ways. There's nothing in the Eudamed about commercial distribution end date, which I think is interesting. The direct marking exemption information. The US does allow a secondary device identifier to be used, and that information all needs to be put into the GUDID as well. So the data elements for the US seem a lot more granular in nature. You know, they really want a lot of specific information, which is a little can be cumbersome because things can change, right? What if your customer contact email changes, your phone number? What if there's a change to the FDA product code? You know, they sometimes they'll change those, so you have to keep that updated. But what's important to know in both the Eudamed and GUDID databases, there are certain data elements that, if changed, will trigger and require a new UDI, a new device identifier. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind and make sure that you understand the data rules for your issuing agencies. The GS1 general specifications goes into a lot of detail about when you need to change the DI. The FDA also has some excellent information on their website related to the GUDID elements, and it'll tell you exactly if changed, if an element is changed, what if the new DI is required or not. This is the information about the database translations. Data fields common to both GUDID and Eudamed. There's a lot of those. Those are the ones that are in bold in the previous slides. Will likely need to be translated into 24 languages. So keep that in mind. And we'll see how that, it says will likely be needed because we haven't seen Eudamed yet. we know that that they're working on it, but until we can go in there for certain, we don't know. One other thing I'll talk about it now, and I'd talk about implementation dates, I guess. For the MDR, you can see the dates here. For labels and packaging, the first implementation date that we're going to come up on is 26th of May 2021, and that's when your implantable and class 3 devices need to have your labels and packaging done. This is, you can see that it's broken down into 3 types of requirements: labels and packaging, your direct marking for your reusable devices, and then your Eudamed database. Now, the Eudamed database, we're supposed to be able to implement submit all of our data to the Eudamed by 26th May 2020. If that's the case and Eudamed isn't ready, what happens? We're still required to have UDI assigned and to have all these data elements compiled, even if we cannot put them in the Eudamed database. So don't put off your UDI, your new UDI implementation program. Don't think that, oh, you're going to wait until you hear that Eudamed is ready. So just be careful about that. The labels and packaging, you need to have the labels done before the product is. You have to have the information in the database before the product goes on the market. So if you have anything new coming up, and then the labels and packaging for all devices need to be compliant by these dates here. Before placing the device on the market, be sure to assign the basic UDI-DI and submit that to the Eudamed along with the core data elements. That's a very clear requirement that's stated in the MDR. This differs a little bit from the FDA implementation dates. There have been some extensions. I'm not going to go into what the past implementation dates were, because those have already hopefully been met by everybody. But for class 1 and unclassified devices manufactured and labeled on or after September 24th of this year, that's been changed for the FDA does not intend to enforce the labeling and data submission until September of 2020. So a 2-year extension on that. And then there's an extension on the direct marking as well to 2022. The finished class 1 and unclassified devices manufactured and labeled before September 24th of this year have until the 21st September 24th of 2020 to be FDA, the UDI compliant. And then the direct marking is the same year. Now, there was recently issued an extension letter on August 9th, 2018, and this was specific to compliance for UDI submissions of device constituents of the co-packaged combination products, are those products that are assigned to SPEEDer for pre-market review. Originally, that extension, they were supposed to be compliant in September of this year, but that has now been changed to September 24th of 2019. However, the labeling requirements have not been extended. So that extension letter that was sent out this August was just for the GUDID submissions. And the FDA has sent out a number of these extension letters. So it's important to be aware of these. Say, get on the FDA website and sign up for the updates and information. So you're aware if and you'll know if these impact you. So that in a nutshell is the UDI requirements in the EU versus the US. Lots of information, and I could continue to go on, but I have limited time. So I'm going to turn it over to you guys. If anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them. I think, Shannon, you're going to take over the question part. And let me just give a caveat. if I'm not able to answer your question, I will certainly, get back to you and respond. If I'm hesitant or not 100% sure about a question, I would rather give it to you in writing and double check rather than give misleading or incorrect information verbally.
So without further ado, if Anetha, if you can put up some of the questions, that would be great. Lena, can you see the screen?
I can.
Okay, and so for those who may not be able to see the screen, I'll repeat the question, and then Lena, maybe you can give some answers. So currently, the FDA states that if a manufacturer private labels for a distributor and the device is sold under their brand but as a distributor, that distributor is responsible for the UDI. For Eudamed, the manufacturer will be responsible for UDI even if the device is branded for the distributor, ?
Oh, that's really, this is interesting because in the EU, we have to look at the various economic operators and what they're responsible for. I would go back to the beginning part of the question and be a little bit hesitant to completely agree with that. The statement that a manufacturer private labels for a distributor and the device is sold that the distributor is responsible for UDI. Again, remember in the US, it's the labeler that's responsible for that. So who's responsible for the legal labeling requirements and who has access to, who has the filing, the 510K, and are they registered? How are they registered with the FDA? With the Eudamed in the EU, again, it's the manufacturer. So the manufacturer is going to be responsible for that UDI. If a product is branded for a distributor, or when you say branded, is it, if I'm buying a product from Shannon, let's say Shannon and Argos is making a product, and then I say, hey, I want to distribute this product for you, and it has Shannon and Argos multilingual all over it, but I'm going to put on a label that says distributed by Qualitas, then Argos is responsible for that. It's their product and I'm just distributing it. But if I am taking that product and saying, okay, now I'm going to sell this as a Qualitas product. This is my product, and then I'm going to assign my own part number to it, and I'm going to market it as a Qualitas, then I'm the manufacturer, and I have to have that UDI. So you have to look at your definitions of what kind of an economic operator are you according to the MDR, and those are very clearly defined in that to help you determine what your requirements are. But again, it's going to come back to who's doing the registration, the filing, who's responsible for that manufacturer. Because if the beginning part, if that manufacturer private labels for a distributor, they're really private labeling. That's not a distributor. They're a manufacturer in their own right, because they'll have it'll have their maybe manufactured for so-and-so company, and then they're the manufacturer for that and would be responsible for the UDI. Long explanation, and I apologize. I tend to get wordy. So if you have further questions or want further clarification, I'd be more than willing to put that in writing for you and get it sent over. All right, our single-use devices, which are a part of the system, exempted for UDI. Yes. I'm just going to say yes very briefly. Now remember, the system is going to have its own, I'm sorry, it's not exempted from UDI. It has to have a UDI, but it's not going to have the direct marking. It's not going to have the labels. So that device may be assigned, a single-use device may be assigned a UDI, but it's not going to be direct mark, and it's not going to have its necessarily its own label within the package. Do ISU user manual and training materials require UDI? No, that's not a requirement. However, think about best practices and does it make sense for you? So I think it's a great way to connect all of your products and data and information together. As we have seen, there's really products are becoming more than just the physical device itself, right? The data and all the information, the label is becoming a part of that medical device. So putting that UDI on the collateral information, the technical documentation, can be very useful, especially in the supply chain and communication of information, but it is not a requirement. All right, next question. We have an app for medical device, one version for iOS, one for Android. Will both of them have the same UDI? That depends. Can you tell I'm in regulatory? I would say that just off the top of my head, I would say they would have different UDIs because they're used differently. But then I'm not a programmer, so I don't know. You know, I would think that there are very distinct differences in the programming and coding of the application for iOS versus Android. But you know, we'd have to look into that further, and it's possible that it could be the same. But again, software as a medical device, or SIMD, software integrated in a medical device, is kind of, it's. I didn't get into a lot of detail here. So if you have further questions on that, I'd love to take a look at it for you and get into more detail. But I would say that just off the top of my head, just looking at this, I would say 2 different UDIs. All right, are implants required to have a direct mark? No. And this is a huge question. You know, everybody says, oh, well, implants have to have that direct mark on it. Nope, implants have to have a UDI. Think about it this way. If you have a pacemaker and you have a direct mark, you have it put on that pacemaker, and then you have that implanted in you. Is that direct mark ever going to be of use to you? Is it ever going to be used again? Only when it's explanted will you be able to get that information. But if you have, so you have to have that UDI and be able to scan it into your electronic health record and keep that information. And that's where the implant cards come in. The implant cards do make the replacement of having the direct mark on the actual implant itself. And that was a change from the original FDA draft UDI guidance. They were saying that implants did need to have direct marking, and that was changed. Question, why doesn't direct marking apply to capital equipment when these products don't have package labels? How can they be compliant with UDI? Okay, so remember that direct marking is for reusable devices that are intended to be processed between uses. That's very clear about what that direct marking use is for. Now, your capital equipment, these large MRI machines, X-ray machines, and so on, they still need to be assigned a UDI. They need to be assigned a unique device identification number and put into the GUDID or the Eudamed database. But typically these products also fall under IEC 60601 and various other electronic mechanical type standards. I am not an IEC standards person, and I really am not familiar with all the intricacies of 60601, but I hear it come up a lot when we're talking about labeling. And with the requirements for that is that you have to have, you have to have a mark on these large machines. So you can put the UDI right on that mark that's required to be on that product for these other standards, but it's not that direct marking is not a requirement of the UDI regulation. So, but it may be for another requirement. I hope that makes sense. It's a little confusing, but when in doubt, if when in doubt, you can always put the UDI on. You can put a direct marking on, whatever. The requirements and the regulation are minimum requirements. You can always go beyond that.
Well, I think that's our last question. Yeah, I think that's our last question. I wanted to open it up and see if there were any other comments or questions from the group that's hung on for a couple more minutes. Okay, I'll take silence as a no. But if there are
any other follow-up questions or you bring some of this information back to your organization, Lena, you can contact Lena directly. She is an amazing resource through this whole process, and I know she'll be happy to connect with you post-webinar. We've also recorded this just as a reminder, and you should be receiving that link within the week. And feel free to distribute to any others who you think this might be valuable for. So I'd like to extend a final thank you to Lena for taking the time and a few extra minutes, and to all of you who hung on past our deadline. So thanks, everybody.